Hey, everybody. Hello. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Can you pick up on the vibes? Would lo- would love to hear from you in the chat if everything sounds good and looks good, and we can get into the questions. I really appreciate you all. I don't really get to do these enough, but I often think um, I'm so kind of like wrapped up in trying to create stuff and doing stuff that I'm just always eternally grateful for my audience. Like I think about you guys every day. It might not seem like I do, but I do. And I love your comments. I love your comments on the videos, just your presence, just like your ideas as well, like the stuff that comes up in the polls. Good. You could hear me. You could see me. Cool. Well, why not? It looks professional on my end. I got a fancy mic. Um, let's see. Should we just dive into the questions, or does anyone have any quick logistical questions in the chat? Things like, what's my favorite right now? My favorite drink is kombucha, although I don't want to show the thingy. I'm a Pisces. Oh, you're New Zealand? Yeah, where are you guys at? Where are all you guys at? Someone said Skokie, Illinois, York, Pennsylvania, New Zealand. Cool. I'm in Western North Carolina, if anyone was curious. If anyone in North Carolina out there? Is anyone from Boston out there, which was my former hometown? Well, it'll always be a hometown, but favorite color? Right now it's orange. Oh, cool. You're first showing stuff to your therapist. What are you showing to your therapist? I'm always curious about that. Someone's in Charlotte, someone's in Asheville. Wow, San Diego, Indianapolis. Oh, it moved too fast. The chat moves too fast. Boston, Lagos in Nigeria. Welcome. Colombia, Newfane, VT, Vermont in the House. Georgia. Favorite song you're stuck on right now is an Elliott Smith song called Happiness, the Gondola Man. I think that's the name of it. And yeah, there's an album called Figure Eight that I'm obsessed with. I'm actually going to be doing a podcast episode with a gentleman who wrote a book about Elliott Smith, William Todd Schultz. I'm very excited about that. In sometime in late March, Detroit. What about Libra? No, I'm a Pisces, not Libra. I'm telling my therapist is all about RRP. Cool. For those who don't know, if I reference RRP, it's the relationship recovery process. That's the group therapy that I did, the group therapy that I teach, the childhood trauma therapy. Alabama, Morocco. Oh my gosh. Hawaii. What time is it in Morocco? I guess that's not too far from like Central Europe or something. Texas, Chicago. How many of you all are there here? Does it say? Let's check it out. 250. Wow. Very cool. Any logistical questions besides color, favorite band? Happy birthday, Pisces. You're the 13th. I'm the 16th. Holy shit, Karen. Oh, Pisces, there's something about us. Highly destructive, highly creative, highly personable. If you could figure out the destructive part, you're all right. Ontario. Wow, this is so cool. Someone put in their favorite song. Like, why did I have to be the only one that threw that out there? I recently bought a Randy Newman album too. Remember Cars? Here in My Car. If you have to be old like me to maybe remember that song. But the synth stuff in that record is just, it's called The Pleasure Principle by Gary Newman. Dig the musical shorts with the drums. I got to go back to those. Everyone's a Pisces. So I want to see zodiac. I want to see zodiac signs in the chat. Favorite song. Someone from Rhode Island? Whoa. What's the name of that mall in Rhode Island in the middle of Providence that used to have a Dave and Buster's that I used to go to when my son was like an infant and we couldn't really go anywhere. So we'd go there. We'd go to a mall. That's what having small children is like. You just go to a mall. Happy Kid by Not a Surf. Love Not a Surf. Very cool. Ed Sheeran, Be Right Now. Cool. Virgos, Phantom of the Opera title song. Sagittarius, Pisces and Moon. I forget what my sun sign is. LA Woman. Whoa. Is that the one where he woke up this morning and he got himself a beer? Is that LA Woman? No, that's something else. Listening to. Oh, you went away. Cancer, Aries, Label Up by Vienna Tag. I don't know them. Do you like? Of course, I love Fleetwood Mac. In my last band, we did a Fleetwood Mac cover night, and I sang "The Chain." And it was cool because I had my singing partner was female, so it was all right. And my guitarist dressed up in like a kimono, like Lindsey Buckingham. It was like an afro and a kimono. It's like very 1977, 76. It was a thing to behold in my former life. On Cancerian in Maine. That's fancy. Tush Tush by ZZ Top, killer song. One Love by Bob Marley. Oh, did someone Common People by Pulp? Oh, Lou. Lou. That's a song. If anyone, you know what? Let's leave let's leave the restream and go check that song out. If you don't know Common People by Pulp. Shabuzi. Who else do I like right now? Dochi, the Dochi album. Anyone into the Dochi album right now? She's holding like an albino alligator on the record. That's Roadhouse Blues. Thanks, Mark. You were right. Cool. Let's just do this. Fuck these questions. I was in a bit in my 20s. I loved it. I miss it. I kind of miss it too, but I had a small child and I'm a sober person and playing out late at night. I was born an 80-year-old man was like, I just want my cup of tea and go home. Into the Mystic by Van Morrison. Recently got into Van Morrison this year. Well, the two albums, Moondance and Astral Weeks. Astral Weeks. Yes, to Dochi. Excuse me. Listening to Hendrix. Mitch Mitchell is a personal favorite of mine. Mitch Mitchell, the drummer of Jimi Hendrix, was a session jazz player, and that's why all that stuff is so amazing what that man did with Jimi Hendrix music. Okay. Dochi's amazing. All right, we could just do the Tom Petty. Love all this. Buckets of Rain. Very cool. Some stuff I have to check out. When I'm mad, I'd like to listen to Rap God by Eminem. I will check that song out. I don't know that. Anything Rush or Journey? Lori, what's your favorite Rush song? You're doing an open mic for your birthday this month? That's fantastic. Go you. That's open mics is where dreams happen, where they start or happen, depending on where you're at. Teleharmonic by The Smile. What album? Because I only have one Smile album. What is that album off of? Because I don't know if I got the right Smile album, although I just have to listen to it a couple times. I get an album, I listen to it once because I'm busy. I might listen to half a side, and then it sits for like 3 months, and I have to come back to it later. So I'm in this weird cycle of albums. Pink Floyd. Okay. Harvest Moon. You guys have effing taste. Really good taste. Dr. Buzzer's Savannah Band. I do not know them. All right. Meyer. Meyer Briggs. I don't know that band. Is that a Dead thing or something? Is that a late 60s psych pop band called the Meyer Briggs? The Meyer Briggs. When I poke around in there, I don't really know enough about the Meyer Briggs to be helpful. I sometimes don't like when people are. I mean, I'm guilty of saying labels and stuff like that. But if someone sort of says, "I'm an Aquarius and I'm an INFTP and the Meyer Briggs, but I'm also a this and the other one," I kind of get lost in it. You know what I mean? Then because I'm just curious about the person's childhood. Wall of Eyes, Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd, I Believe by R. Kelly, 310 Watching. Okay. All right, let's stop avoiding the uncomfortable and get to these childhood trauma questions. They were excellent, and I'm sorry if I didn't get to them all. Incidentally, I have a couple links that I'm going to be putting up in this chat. The first is if you are seeking a childhood trauma therapist, because many of the questions are related to that, the therapists that we've trained are on this link tree, and they are by location, which is very, very helpful. If you don't see your location, consider looking at people who practice internationally, or keep coming back to that link and save the link because we're always training more therapists. We recently got my mentor, Amanda Curtin, has a new batch of therapists that she's sort of training. I believe 2 new groups of RRP therapists. So in reference, hold on to that link and just make note of it. And These are folks that we train, but they don't work for us. But you're welcome to start a conversation with them and check out their practice if you're looking. And they are all group therapists. Where RRP, again, the relationship recovery process, is this childhood trauma model that is done in group work. You could do a little bit of individual with stuff, but it doesn't really. The most of the work happens. 90% of the work happens in a group. So, all right, you guys ready for the question? Should we just go for it? Nay, yay. Talk more about music. All right, let's just do it because why we already put in all that work to like ask the questions. Okay, here we go. How can we lead our partner? And I'm reading over here because I saved your question. So with some little notes, how can we lead our partner out of being a sounding board position if they unconsciously are in it because they want to help? It's a great question related to the emotional security video that I just put out. And in that video, I talk about feedback and as well as for many of us who are partnered, there's always this kind of thing if we're not in kind of therapy, if our partner is psych minded and if there's like a good enough bond there, that the partner usually becomes like the catch all. And that's normal in partnerships where we talk about our days, hopefully, and we talk about our emotions and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes it can burden the relationship if our partner, this is probably my main point in that video, if our partner is both playing the role as partner and as therapist and sounding board. So sounding board is sort of having a sounding board. I think we all need that, like a mentor, a therapist, somebody safe in our life that we can bounce things off of to sort of to say, am I triggered here? Is it me? Is it them? What do you think about this? And it's an interesting thing also too that it can't all be validation from somebody. Like if I you don't really want a yes person in your life. Like you want to be somebody who is safe and can give you some feedback on maybe what you're bringing into situations. So if your partner is on they maybe want to be, here are some advice that I have for the author of this question. And again, the question is, how can we lead our partner out of being a sounding board position if they unconsciously are in it because they want to help? Very cool that they want to help. A couple questions for you to consider is, might the partner have a little bit of codependency going on? I'm not reading into anything in the question, but sometimes if they really want to help, and if it's a new relationship, people can be very wanting to help, and there's many people who are probably on this live who struggle with codependency. I did. My whole thing was fixing people. So here are my recommendations is have a boundary discussion with them and really talk to them around where to get a sense about, because it sounds like for you it's becoming maybe too much. So you're asking too much and they're like too available, which meaning many couples have a hard time addressing conflict head on. So we tend to want to be help, but just like kind of that happens in groups as well. So boundary discussion and really talk to them about, I'm probably bouncing too much stuff on you. Even if they're fine with it, you might not be fine with it. And to sort of to say, I'm going to try to like bring some stuff to you, but also take care of myself maybe before I bring stuff to you. Another trick you could do is take care of your inner child and sort of try to self validate before you seek out the partner. There's a reparenting the inner child course in my membership that you can check out. Where dialoguing, if I reference that, that's when we talk with our inner child on paper between our dominant hand and our non dominant hand. And the other recommendation I have is to have another resource in your life, a therapist, a partner, somebody, no, you already got the partner, a therapist, a friend, somebody that you can bounce things off of. Where really my main message with this question, which is fantastic, is we want to protect our partners a little bit from becoming the catch-all for everything. Sometimes we want to be protecting them of our projections. Sometimes we want to be protecting them of needing to be taking care of us. Who out there gets into a rut with your partners where you both just seem to be complaining about the world? And that's the intimacy. That's a little bit of a red flag that maybe something kind of needs to kind of change, where you may not be talking about that pattern with each other. Does that make any sense to people out there? Hopefully it did. So to recap, have a boundary discussion about them. And I don't mean like you're doing something wrong kind of boundaries. The boundary is sort of like, I want to kind of take care of myself before I bring stuff to you. In a way, you might be sort of saying, I need to change a little bit and sharing things with you versus you taking care of me so much, because that can burden a relationship. Take care of your inner child maybe before you go into those discussions with your partner, and have another resource in your life, a therapist, a mentor, a friend, where you bounce things off them first, because our partners, they're it's lovely to be partnered, but sometimes, again, like with our stuff, we can burden that partnership, or we might be contributing to a level of intimacy that isn't good for the partnership. So I really love that question. I really appreciate that question. Next question. You mentioned in the emotional security video about graceful exits. Meaning people who are, for those who are unaware, like, or remember from the video, a graceful exit is when people who are more emotionally secure can end a relationship or end a job or end a friendship from a place of being more graceful, as opposed to blowing it up, or as opposed to like avoiding, uncomfortable conversations indefinitely. So the person saying, I've burned so many bridges and left relationships over things that later weren't that big of a deal. Totally relate to that. I have to blow it up to leave. Anyone out there relate to that? Who needs to like burn down the world in order to leave a job? Like, you have to, another way to frame that is, I used to have to build a case to talk myself into leaving a job or leaving a relationship, because of my own self doubt and my own, I don't want to be the bad guy. So I really had to convince myself those things, instead of just gracefully saying, this isn't really for me, and you're a good person, I'm a good person, I'm just going to take off. Or, this isn't for me, and this job doesn't really work for me, and I'm out. So it's definitely not everyone has that kind of going on, but it is an inner child thing. Even though I sometimes don't want to leave and later regret it, I can't figure out why, but I know it's not mature. A couple things with this one: inner children, depending on the family that you grew up in and depending on the type of of abuse you went through, if you identify with that, um, people have that usually going on if there was a lot of abuse around fairness and power, and we can be overly protective of our power, and not that we're not going to be abandoned again or something like that. So we might be dating somebody and we might want out of it, but we might have to really kind of like pick them apart in order to leave. One thing, it's meaning that we don't really trust our own power, but we also might have to leave to convince ourselves that we have the right to leave, which is another issue of power. Does anyone relate to what I'm sort of saying here? Because this is kind of sneaky and tricky. Again, not everyone has it kind of going on. The trauma of having no recourse when we were kids can really run us, or we might have like an unhealthy body reaction that is convinced it can never be trapped in something again. So, this is a better way to say it. Let's just say you struggle to use your voice and you use your power, and you want to leave a job, and you have a meeting with your boss to give your notice, and they talk you into staying. Has anyone been in that position because they were able to talk you into staying, but you didn't feel like you had the power or the right, or somehow you leaving made you a bad person? So in that way, when the boss is like, "Oh, but we really need you. We love you here, and I can give you 1 hour off a week. That's convenient convenient for us." But folks who are really get were abused around power or feel a lot of shame, like they were a bad kid or they're a bad person. That's the best example I kind of have with this one. Um, so that's what I mean about graceful exits, where we're honoring ourselves in it, and even maybe even honoring the other people that we're maybe like saying goodbye to or something. So, um, when for the person who wrote the question, is to figure it out, is I would do a dialogue with the inner child, or try to figure out, do a genogram. These are all resources that are on my website in the membership, and try to figure out where the family was abusive around power. Another way to look at it too is, I used to get really, who gets triggered around feeling that people are going to disappoint you. Like, they're not going to show up on time, they're not going to, remember your birthday, they're not going to show up with the thing that you need. I grew up in an alcoholic family, so that was definitely something that ran me. And I was hyper vigilant about friends and girlfriends maybe disappointing me. And that's where a lot of my wrath as a childhood trauma survivor, where I blow up bridges and stuff like that, would come from. So again, to try to figure out for the author of this question, were there issues around fairness and power growing up? Also, were people disappointing you in a way that so as when this happens to us in childhood, but when we grow into adults, we can have this like not today Satan kind of energy about us. So when we go on a date and the person is 15 minutes late and we leave and like you're dead to me, you're a piece of like instead of giving them the benefit of the doubt, 15 minutes late is different than a half hour late. Um, so that's kind of what I mean there, like where we burn bridges because we go back to an experience where we were probably really either messed with or power was used against us or people didn't show up for us. You know what I mean? Like who gets triggered um when your partner doesn't have a lot of enthusiastic energy about the day or you or something like that? It's a similar vibe and we can get really upset. We can really kind of either get mad or whatever. Because it really takes us back to if we're not aware of it, if we're not working on it, it really takes us back to having a parent who's really apathetic. So there's a bunch of ways that that can manifest for the author. So I hopefully that was helpful. Next question. My whole life I'm in my 50s and I'm still renting. I wonder if they were referencing the emotional security video. I've compared myself to others in a less than way, but I can't seem to ignore the fact that I've never really launched in life where others have. I know what you mean. I bloomed very much late in life. I try not to feel anger when I hear people say that they were able to buy a house because of parental help they had, and they happened to also buy a house at the right time. Any thoughts on that? Yep. It would be good to look it's you may not be, this may not be what you're expecting, but the question you're asking is really about 2 things, something called the setup and grief. The setup is in a way like if when we grow up in these families in childhood trauma and abuse, and at 18 years old, we really have no sense of self. We might have gotten into relationships with really not great people, even not great marriages for a long time. And like, let's just say if you had a very aggressive mother and a very codependent father, you were set up to probably replicate relationships like that. So the setup in childhood trauma work, or actually more RRP work, is really looking at the ways that we will feel really crappy about ourselves. Um, like another example is like, let's just say you're a teenager and you're really neglected or told that you're stupid or whatever. So you happen to work very menial jobs. You never really try to go for education because all of those things, you were told that those things are not for you. That's the setup. And we have to kind of look at that in our therapeutic work in the way that, even in a way where if you struggle with like projecting on a partner and blowing up at them or being super codependent or whatever it is, might you have been set up for those behaviors because you learned them from a parent. So the setup is about looking at accountability. So for late blooming, it might spend some time looking at, and this is not blame, it's just looking at actual development, looking at the ways that, in what ways where your family might have set you up from a place of self-esteem or self-worth, or even, even if we had a parent who didn't launch themselves. Well, I've had many clients that were sort of like parents who were like, "Oh, education is way too expensive. You don't want to do that. You want to work in a very, very safe, work for the town, work for a very, where you really can't grow and you really can't make a lot of money and you really don't. You live a very unfulfilled life, but that's the way to be." That's another version of the setup. So, some thoughts on that. So it's complicated, the setup, and then the other thing is grief. I would recommend an RRP group and start to, which is all really essentially about grief work of really looking at our childhoods, looking at things like accountability, the setup, a lot of processing, but also some grief work about who out there on this live right now feels like they've lost a lot of time in their life to their trauma, who worked in an industry that really wasn't for them for 10 years, who like has been in 2 marriages that were abusive, and we've lost a lot of time. So, I've had clients in their 60s and 70s that wanted to do this work, which is really admirable. They would come into me into my practice when I was practicing, and that was their main struggle was the loss of time, the loss of, and we have to grieve that. So the 2 things, the setup and grief. And then you might be asking, "Oh, then what?" Where we kind of have to get real about that. We have to look at the ways that we lost time in order to get that out of the way to go after things that we want. Like it's in some ways, if we want the career, if we want the relationship, if our childhood trauma is still loud and in charge in the background, it's almost like it's not really going to work. We really have to deal with these things before we're able to kind of move on. And that's the work of looking at this stuff and moving on. But also, there's also something I really want to make known is because this question really jumped out at me because I really I'm a first time homeowner. I've rented my entire life around Boston. I think I was in like 14 different rentals with different roommate situations, and I was a parent and launching my business, and I was still renting because I couldn't afford a house, especially up in that area. And it's very painful to hear, coming back to the grief, that people get some parental help for a down payment in an expensive area, or they bought at the right time. So those why I bring that up is, excuse me, those situations can feel like things are never gonna I felt this way for a long time. I felt like buying a house was never gonna happen for me. But those I just remember those feelings were pretty terrible. Like, even if sort of this can happen for people who are they've yet to marry, they've yet to had kids, and it feels like the clock is ticking. Life can be pretty brutal in that way. But everyone has their own sort of path. But really think the best thing to answer this question, in order to go after what we want, is we have to get real about the time lost and how we were set up for all that time lost. So I really appreciate that question. And moving on to the next one, I think it's a shorter one. Recently, a friend told me that my lower back issues are due to my trauma. Well, I hope they could be. Excuse me. Maybe I'm taking that too concrete. Recently, a friend told me that my lower back issues are due to my trauma. Maybe it could be related to your trauma, but I know what you mean. Like in the book, The Body Keeps the Score. What kind of therapist helps with trauma stored in the body, and how does one work to release the trauma um, in a DIY? I think you mean probably like self healing capacity if you don't have the insurance to see a trained professional. Well, the DIY stuff is really hard. I would look into videos on somatic work, guided meditations, and stuff like that. DIY, you could get there, but DIY is essentially like DIY. Um, I know what you mean, and you have to do what you have to do if you don't have the insurance or the cash to see somebody. But to answer the first part of your question, yes, body work, something called somatic work, which focus on the body. Seeing a Reiki practitioner, that actually might be a really good resource. It might be less expensive. Um, if they're good at working with Reiki, it seems like a pseudoscience. It's like it was very, very helpful to me. But a good Reiki practitioner like is doing Reiki on you, but they can also help you develop a relationship to parts of your body, symptoms. Like if they were doing work on your lower back, I think some Reiki practitioners might be sort of saying, what might your lower back be trying to tell you emotionally? And there starts to be a conversation around that. And a holistic idea that I love is this idea that our symptoms are telling us something. So the lower back could be a place where you store some trauma, that kind of a thing. So somatic work, Reiki, RRP, although not super, super directly, I think just people tend to come back into their body through processing their childhood trauma. Body work with a body centered therapist who gets trauma. And again, it's either somatic therapies. IFS might even be able to help you, internal family systems, but that's not exactly specifically a body centered thing. Somatic experiencing, sensory motor therapy. There's also a really cool thing you can Google called Eugene Genlin's The Felt Sense, which is starting to have a conversation around um, it's like developing a narrative. Like if my shoulder was always tense and achy or something like that, the felt sense is thinking about, does it have a color? Does it have a shape? What might it want to say to you? Similar to the Reiki thing that I mentioned. Um, so there's that. Appreciate that. Also, I forgot to mention for the quest for the emotional security video I'm offering. There is a lecture that I'm doing this Saturday. It's a paid lecture, FYI. So when you open up this link, be prepared for that. Saturday, the 8th at 1 p.m. There are spots left if you want to check that out. There's going to be A full lecture on it, slides, you get a video. You can also consider joining the membership, and you'll be able to get access to the lecture anyway. But what I'm really proud of is I developed a 30-page workbook on emotional security covering those things discussed in the video. So you're welcome to check out that. And also, and if you're seeking more than a lecture, again, here is the list of RRP therapists that we've trained for that. Oh yeah, someone also mentioned tapping, which is very much a body centered thing. It's also like a self soothing thing. Highly recommend that too. Okay, let's see. Next question. I don't quite get how waiting. This is again from the emotional security video. I don't get how quite get how waiting for the other shoe to drop is both hypervigilance and an emotional insecurity issue. Like, do people not live like I do, waiting for the relationship or the job to end or the friendship to end? I would say many childhood trauma survivors do. I live that way. How is waiting for the shoe to drop related to the chutes and ladders in the video? And isn't it normal? Um, I'm 37, female with anxiety, and grew up with one alcoholic parent and one covert narcissistic parent. These things, it's funny, like, I love this question, isn't it normal? I plan on doing a video down the road is like, is it just life or is it trauma? Because many of our things can feel normal, can feel like that, can feel like but there's a difference. Let's just say in topical now, let's just say you've been working for the government for 5 years and you've always wondered about getting laid off, or you're always kind of hearing rumblings about getting laid off and that kind of stuff. Um, so there's that like almost like normative present based concern. No one wants to lose a job, especially if they're like if it's working for them. But the difference is it trauma? Is it life? It's the narrative that we have in the day to day about our trauma, which makes the present piece worse. So, does anyone have that going on where you're at a job and you're pretty convinced like any day is going to be your last day, or you might have bouts of that come up? Um, that's definitely waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's also definitely I would consider it hypervigilance, but it's also a little bit normal to wonder if you're going to lose your job. You know what I mean? It's not. It all depends on the inner feelings and the inner anxiety, and it really depends on how the inner child might be building a case, or like I mentioned in the workbook, like looking at the present through the lens of childhood, and what I mean by that about the job thing is sort of like, oh shit, Kathy and Tom are talking by the water cooler. I wonder what's up. Like, oh shit, the boss sent out a meeting. What does it all mean? That could be just normal work stuff, or it could be our inner child really building a case and building up the anxiety. Do you guys know what I mean by that? We could do that with anything. Who does that with a relationship? Oh, they haven't texted me back. Or they seemed a little bit moody this morning. I wonder if anything's wrong, you know? That's the kind of stuff. So, um, to answer the person's question, how is waiting for the other shoe to drop related to the shoots and ladder video, or how is it both hypervigilance and emotional security? Is it I do see it as a trauma symptom of anxiety and not feeling secure in the world on kind of two levels. The security is it's like we can be too amped up about what we're going to lose, a relationship, a job, something like that, a connection with a friend. And there's this absence of an inner security. Not that we would be apathetic or not care about those things, but to the inner child growing up where nothing worked out, and like if you were a child of divorce, this is a very common childhood trauma thing. Someone's a child of divorce, and one of the parents who doesn't live with them anymore keeps promising a weekend together that never materializes. That can really affect a child's conditioning of the connection of do they matter or whatever. And we can grow up into adults that are still focused on um, what the conditioning is. There is that mom said she was going to visit this weekend. I'm super pumped about it. I hope it works out. I hope she comes. And then she doesn't. And then we go back into like, oh, I hope it works out. Hope she comes. And then gradually it's like she's not going to come. I know that that's a real bummer, and also the author of the question, I'm 37 years old, female with anxiety, grew up one alcoholic parent and one covert narcissistic parent. Waiting for the other shoe to drop, you have one alcoholic parent who is probably not functioning very well. and then you have a covert narcissistic parent who is making things about themselves. So I would say, and I'm not reading so much into your trauma, but anybody who had those presentation of parents is it probably wasn't safe to get your hopes up. So that might be another part of the hypervigilance. You got one alcoholic parent that's probably really functioning problems, hit or miss. And then if something does go wrong, maybe the covert narcissistic parent messes with you or makes it about them or gets really mopey about it. So it's sort of like to these kids growing up in that, it's not really safe to believe in hope. That can be another version of looking at how it might be hypervigilance. And for emotional security, what is helpful about it is connecting with our inner child. And again, this is all in the course in the workbook. Connecting with our inner child, where we have more of a foundation with our inner child, so that the loss of the job or the disconnection with the partner doesn't burn as much, because those things used to say to us, like with an alcoholic parent or a narcissistic parent, when they would let you down, it would be like, I'm a worthless kid. But if our inner child is bonded with us, we can change that narrative into just like, it's, me and my inner child kind of like we've got each other. So we're going to be okay no matter what. We will still have feelings about things, but it's different, where waiting for the other shoe to drop is like watching out for pain. So there's a lot going on with that, and I know that that wasn't really prolific. Of course, it's about that, but hopefully that makes sense. And thank you for that question. Thanks, Patrick, for doing this. I get hyper focused if my partner is a little bit off. Well, let me read that. I get hyper focused if my partner plays a little bit of, well, not even devil's advocate, but that's how it feels, and I feel like they betray me and they're taking sides, even when I know they are just asking me about what happened. And I hate it. I think that they're saying they hate their reaction to their partner. I think that they're saying it feels like devil's advocate, but it's not. How do I reparent my inner child about feeling betrayed in almost everything that comes up? Like, I'm looking for someone to say I'm always the bad guy in anything that I feel, and I'd love to not go there anymore. So let me read it one more time. I get hyper focused if my partner plays a little bit of devil's advocate when that's not even what it is, but that's how it feels, and I feel like they betray me and are taking sides, even when I know that they're just asking me questions about what happened. Who relates to that? Who relates to just someone even potentially not taking your side? Um, we can really, depending on our childhood trauma, we can really be amped up about that. Um, so a little bit of a hypothetical, like where this kind of stuff comes from is really stuff like growing up in an anti-love family or being scapegoated, that there's really a conditioning that anytime you needed to express pain or problem as a kid, you would get really off feedback. I have a lot of clients that have really parents who are not mentally well, and one would, like, let's just say a client was bullied at school. They go home and they tell their parent about it. If they still tell their parents about things, because they're not usually not safe, abusive parents, and they get told, "Oh, I could see why you got bullied because you're pretty wishy washy," and it's like a huge turnaround. It's really, really off. Oh, I could see why you got bullied, because it's like you don't know how to dress yourself, like those kids were probably just having fun. Or I could see why you got bullied because you have such a mouth on you, you know? So there's really this conditioning again with how we grow up, is like when we're seeking help, um, things really got twisted and turned around. And there's a double whammy. It's called a violation of feelings. Hang on a second. So the opposite of this would be, in a healthy family system, all feelings are tolerated. And if we grew up in that rule, we wouldn't get so triggered to people asking questions or taking in what we're going to say. Like, I would say, I love the question so much because I've been there, but I would couch this as your inner child is vigilant about your partner not taking your side. And it's almost like a self-sabotaging kind of thing, because you'll find the evidence that they're looking away or they're asking questions or whatever. And you might go to a big place, I think, when so there's that. Um, how to what to do with it, which is tricky, is to really focus on childhood where things really got turned around, where sharing your feelings weren't safe. And it really comes down to that emotional security. It's really, I wish I just saw this question when I wrote the video because it's a great example of issues around feedback, people's body language, asking questions. Because in that lecture, I talk about how we can who gets even reactive to people's questions. Someone at work is like, "Oh, hey, what's going on with that thing?" And you might be like, "It's coming Tuesday. I'm really overworked." Like there's a reaction, when someone is just asking a question. And a way out of it is hold parents accountable. I'd recommend an RRP group. It's bigger than just a cerebral kind of approach that you might. I mean, it would be helpful. Um, you can go into conversations with your partner, sort of like, I need help, and I'm going to try to not be reactive. And you know what I mean? Is really need some honest help. I'm going to try to not let my inner child project onto you. That's one way you can approach it. But this stuff is usually much bigger than that. I would recommend an RRP group, because it's a lot of work to undo that kind of conditioning and process what happened. We have to process, like in the example that I gave, we have to process the parent who would kick us when we're down. And I lost my train of thought there. What was like feelings being tolerated in a healthy? A favorite book is called "Healthy Parenting" by Janet Woititz. I'm gonna put it right here. Really helpful book about healthy versus unhealthy family systems. Woititz might be out of print, might be tricky to get. I recommend eBay. She gave this a genius list of what 10 points of what a healthy family system does and what an unhealthy family system does. And I know I talk about this at length, but I still love it. My favorite one on there, in a healthy family system, all feelings are tolerated. In an unhealthy family system, feelings are often repressed or violated. So in that example of that question, like a fourth grader goes home, they've been bullied at school and they're already upset, and the parent kind of says, "Oh, I could see why you got bullied because you're a wishy-washy kid." Something weird, like it's not even helpful. It's just a put down, right? That is a violation of pre-existing feelings. The kid came home with big feelings about being bullied. And then families who are really toxic, really abusive, they will violate those pre-existing feelings. Does that make sense? This also happens a lot. So trigger warning in this about sexual assault. This happens a lot. I've had many female clients who had this chain of events that happened, that in their teenage years, they were sexually assaulted in some way. And then when they brought it to the family, things got really twisted around and they were blamed for it in some way. They were the family skipped that their daughter was just assaulted, and they went right to blame, right to, like, taking the other person, even taking the other person's side, you name it. So that is a violation of pre-existing feelings. Another version of it is when we have, like, the evil step-parent in their life, and then we're in pain, and we go to our biological parent, and they take the step-parent side. It's already violated the feelings of, there's been a divorce, now there's a weird step parent in my life, there's no process around that kind of stuff. So, appreciate that question. How we doing on time? Doing great on time. What are some ways that people who have issues with persistent dissociation, or DPDR, I think that's like depersonalization, derealization, from CPTSD, can start to be more grounded in reality, particularly when typical mindfulness exercises feel unsafe? I think I know what you mean by that. I've had major issues with dissociation since childhood, stemming from neglect and emotional abuse. I've been in therapy for years to process trauma and work through depression, which has been helpful, but it seems to be constantly disconnected from myself in the world to an extreme extent. DPDR resources say, just don't think about your DPDR and eventually you'll recover. Um, and disassociation resources say, ground yourself in reality, which feels unsafe and manageable. I totally get it. I have two things to recommend. And you probably already know the first one. But in the first one would be to really create a concrete list and this may or may not be helpful because sometimes the DPDR will just happen on its own. If there are triggers that specifically trigger your DPDR or your disassociation, like what comes up? Could it be conflict? Could it be seeing other people have like fuller lives? Could it be about something around a performance thing for you, like at work? Um, so to really kind of figure out and nail what happens, the other recommendation is an RRP group. And it sounds crazy, but I think for many of us as kids, it was unsafe to be seen. And in an RRP group, you're processing and you're kind of being around other people. And it's probably, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you're in a group and it came up and you were able to talk about it while it came up, I don't want to say it's like exposure therapy, but it's somewhere in there where my point is that RRP groups, we kind of get healing around being seen or being a little bit on the spot. And DPDR might be a thing. RRP, the relationship recovery process. It's a childhood trauma model that I teach and do, developed by Amanda Curtin. You can check out an interview with her on the channel. I just saw something in the chat. So DPDR, where growing up, usually for us, being seen in our family probably wasn't good. We might have been the object of ridicule. We might have been put into a really uncomfortable position, like being parentified, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. And in an RRP group or in a really good interpersonal group, to be able to talk about your feelings as they come up around other people who are safe, that's what we should be experiencing in our family. So there's a recreation of safety. There are no guarantees depending on the group of people and the therapist, the skill of the therapist in an interpersonal group. But it's a little bit like the DPDR might be saying it's never safe to be in present. It's never safe to be in our body. And I love that you say, particularly when typical mindfulness exercises feel unsafe. I find that we can dissociate when we're put into like a task that might make us dissociate a little bit more. For people who really struggle with derealization and depersonalization, meditation can be a nightmare because meditation might feel a little bit like you're dissociating anyway. Or in mindfulness, if they're saying give you a raisin, eat the raisin and think about the flavors, that might trigger it too. I'm not an expert in all that, but I've just kind of known. And it's also too, I'm generalizing. Different things might work for different people, that kind of a thing. But when you really think about it, I want to ask a question for everybody. I talk a lot about RRP groups here. What's your first thought when I suggest getting into a group? What's the first thought your inner child has about joining a group with other childhood trauma survivors and talking about this stuff and showing up and being present? What's your first thought? In terms of what is your inner child's thought? I'm looking for like, fuck, I'm not doing that. You know, um, the idea of joining a group, the body might be like, remember, our first group is our family. So our body might be like, a group. Why would I ever do that again? Why would I ever have to take care of everybody? Why would I have to expose myself? Why would I have to feel so overwhelmed? Why would I join a group for people to just pick me apart? And those are all assumptions. What if they have the same problems that I have? There's another funny thing about groups. So hopefully I make people laugh. Every time I've had somebody, and I'm a group therapist, I love group therapy. Group therapy saved my life. It is not for everybody, but everyone who sits down in a childhood trauma group or an RRP group, they're thinking I am too messed up to be here, or I am not messed up enough, which are like shame-based thoughts. So keep in mind about if you're reluctant to think about joining a group or look into a group or something like that. Our first group is our family, and they may have wrecked our perception of what groups are like. So really appreciate that. What a time to jump in. What a time to be alive. Hi, April. Just caught that. So I hope that was helpful to you. Whether it's you have a childhood trauma therapist, which is great. Another option is EMDR, but like Groups, I really think is where it's at if you can tolerate, a group. Most people can tolerate a group fine. We might think we can't, but, dear Patrick, what do you do if your parents were emotionally abusive up to when I was age 28, but when I moved out, they became nice and different? I feel like their parenting has led to my ability to get basic things out of my led to my inability to get basic things out of my life, a job, friends, self-esteem. They have improved as much as they have improved so much as people, but I can't forget all the damage that was done. To this day, I'm damaged goods, so it's hard to move on more completely. My self-esteem is really destroyed, and I have a long-term depression. I'm very sorry about that. If I ever bring this up to them, they would completely deny all of it. That's a huge problem. I've tried to reparent myself, but it takes 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Hard to repair self-esteem. It's hard to repair. Um, so I love the question because it's true that parents can either mellow out or under different circumstances, they can kind of be a little bit better. But in the relationship recovery process, the again, that's the childhood trauma work that I do. This philosophical idea is that we are processing the parents as they were like in childhood. Because we might imagine if you had a parent who was incredibly abusive alcoholic, but they got sober and they started to really make amends to you. As rare as that is, it has happened. But as a thought exercise, that would still be hard because they were so abusive, but now they're sober and wonderful and they feel terrible about what they did and they're really trying to heal the relationship with their children through their sobriety, but there still needs to be work around what happened. So if you were coming into an RRP group, we would really be focusing on what they were like, because there's this thing like with the parent who got sober, and like in this question, we tend to not know what to do with it. Well, they're nicer now, so I guess I have to forget my childhood trauma. Our brains can kind of think in a black and white way. When just make note of that, and you don't have to. You do have some business to finish, and you've already tried to finish it with them, but they completely denied all of it. So they might be a little bit safer, but not much safe. They just might be less stressed out. Some parents are just triggered by having children. It's not good. They need to do work on that. Like, that is on them. But it's like, you moved out at 28 and they became nicer. It makes me think about maybe these people were never good, you know, in a never, what am I trying to say? Not good candidates to be parents, but people need to learn how to become good candidates if they have parents. So that's something that you can hold them accountable for. So that's really, people can mellow out a little bit and change, but I would recommend an RRP group. There is work to do around that. There's a lot of damage. But this is what I wanted to say with this question. You don't have to feel weird about what happened to you, and you don't have to feel weird that they're nicer now, because they, like you're saying, they still caused a lot of damage. You don't like have to be um ashamed about that just because they're nicer. Because again, like, it'd be a good dialogue with your inner child to ask your inner child, how do they feel about mom and dad now that they were a little bit. RRP is the relationship recovery process, childhood trauma work that I do. Um, you don't have to dialogue with the inner child and ask them, um, how do you feel about mom and dad now that they were a little bit nicer? And what do you think that that means about what happened? Because inner children think in black and white terms, and they might think, I'm a bad kid. Maybe it was all in my head. They might be a little bit confused. So your inner child might need some help from your inner parent, inner adult that's like, this really happened. It's not okay. And it's so sad and messed up that mom and dad still deny all of it, you know? So, um, it's funny, like, I know what you mean, I'm not trying to mince your words. When I was 28, but when I moved out, they became nice and different. I would probably say your parents became less stressed because they didn't have to be parents anymore, and it might be a job that they didn't want, and you have the right to get really pissed about that because you're left holding this weird bag of, like, I've got all this, like, damage and work that I need to do in therapy. and now they're a little bit more respectful or nicer, but yet they won't talk about it. You're in a very hard position, and you have the right to be pissed about it. You know, if you feel messed up about it, I would feel messed up about it too. It's really confusing. A relationship recovery process group would help make some sense about that and start to process what it was really like. Be really good to hear another group member kind of say, um, "God, your parents just sound so like I just feel nauseated that you left and they just wanted to redecorate the house as if they were out of some kind of fucking as if they were retired from like that kind of stuff. Hopefully I'm making sense there. Really appreciate that question. As someone who grew up in an emotionally neglectful, anti-love family, I struggle with a deep-rooted fear of being replaced, even when there's no real evidence. I often feel that people only keep me around, kind of like coming back to the shoe to drop question, out of pity or lack of better options. When new people enter my social circles, I feel threatened as if I'll inevitably be substituted. This has been a recurring pattern in my life. How can I work on building emotional security and overcoming fear? Um, Really relate to that. I really lived in being feeling like I could be abandoned at any minute by anybody in my life, especially romantic partnerships. Again, our RRP group, working with your inner child, start dialoguing with your inner child about what they think is going to happen. Um, what they think is going to happen when they're around people, or that people only keep you around out of lack of pity or lack of better options. I'm going to read that sentence again. I often feel that people only keep me around out of pity or lack of better options. It might be really good to dialogue about that and figure out if your inner child felt that in childhood or early childhood or growing up with your parents in any way. Like related to the last question, if we have parents that just like became less stressful after you moved out and they were abusive but never really owned it, um, let me put it this way in the chat, who felt like they were a burden to their parents? You might have been specifically told that, or that's just the vibes that you felt. Who had a fuck my life parent, the parent who really didn't want to be a parent? And then they put that energy out there. And that's kind of what I'm getting at in this question. Um, I often feel that people only keep me around out of pity or lack of better options. That you're just nailed my own father. Do you know what I mean? Like he always felt like he should have not had kids and done something else in life. So when new people enter my social circles, I feel threatened as if I'll inevitably be substituted. So these are all things to explore in a dialogue. Who made you feel like you were like a charity case to be around? Which parent felt like they could leave or have better options? Or simply, did you have a parent that was really disconnected and miserable? Because inner children, they are biologically assuming that there's going to be love and connection. And then we get the miserable parents if we grew up in abuse that we kind of get. I would consider joining an RRP group. I would consider really looking into like the dialoguing reparenting course that I offer, or come to the lecture, because the reparenting course is included in the lecture. It's an additional course included. Um, it's going to take some work rebuilding emotional security kind of around that. The first step is to really process what it was like as a kid with healthy people. That's why I'm recommending a group. And the second part is to start to reparent the inner child, to show them that it's actually safe to be around people. So, another plug for group therapy. If the author of this question showed up to a group, and I relate to this because this is how I kind of showed up. I showed up to the first group that I did many, many years ago in the late 90s. Um, I showed up thinking that I was the most messed up person in that room, and I was kind of like a dirty kid. And I did a lot of people pleasing. So if you kind of say that when new people enter your social, you feel threatened by new people as if I'll inevitably be substituted. Imagine like what your kid would feel if you joined a group, and then imagine the healing if the group was like, we don't really kind of want you to have that experience, and we don't want that kind of energy that you were pitting you or something like that. And the group in a really loving way, this is over time. This is like 2 years in. This is not in like the second session. If they really are like challenging you in a good way that, you know, we want you to be part of, but we need you to start be acting to be part of because it feels like when you come into group, this is how real group work can get. When you come into group, it always feels like you got one foot on the way out because we're gonna kick you out. You know what I mean? Like, who lives like that? Like, and I'm not judging this author in any way. I'm just kind of saying what the work would kind of look like. I've lived this myself, so I know what it's like. But like with a healthy partner is very accepting, but they don't want our inner child's projection. You know, who shows up to a job a little bit like, well, you're probably going to fire me in a week anyway, so I guess I'll just do my best. Like that's really an inner kid kind of thing. Who shows up to a date probably saying, you probably have another date lined up after this. You're really good looking. Not that you would say you would say that. You know what I mean? Like many of us live like that. And it's like we're predicting and keeping ourselves safe. But here's a question for you all, and maybe you can relate. What is it like to be on the receiving end of that? What is it like to go on a date and someone's like, "Well, you probably, or you probably would wanna be dating someone who is, like, better in some way." How does that make us feel, you know? This is what's weird. When we do that, "You probably won't wanna hire me, you probably won't wanna date me." When we're projecting like that, we're telling the person we're on a date with that they're a little bit like a perpetrator. "You're probably gonna hate me." You know, it's a little bit like our kids saying to our parents, "You're probably not gonna show up because you don't really like me." You know? Those things are really advanced things that we need to think about, how our inner child kind of and it's heartbreaking, we need to help them not live like that, but we show up to relationships if we show up with our in a relationship with our unchecked trauma, we kind of are replicating those dynamics. You're gonna let me down, you're not gonna like me, you're gonna pick somebody else, and that's where people want different things from us, and we also can really burden other people with that. Do we have RRP programs in Australia? No, but we do have some internationally. Let me put that in the link again. Here is the link tree of RRP therapists. Here is Saturday's lecture on emotional security, and you can join the membership at a discount and get a whole bunch of other stuff. You get the whole membership course sequence, as well as the lecture. Okay, let's see how we doing on time. So I really appreciate that question. That is a really, really hard question. I lived that question for so many years, and you can do it. You can really kind of help your inner child not live that way, because in a way, like I used to live in the Irish goodbye. Like I would be saying goodbye before I said hello. And that's, and then I would be wondering why people didn't feel connected with me. So we can really be set up for this self-sabotaging thing. So I really appreciate that author's question. Thank you. Okay, this is another deep question that I love. I often do healthy tasks and activities and set meaningless goals as a distraction from feelings of emptiness and purposelessness. But it makes my life feel like a joyless series of to-do list items, even interacting with friends. And if I have little investment in the outcome. I love this question so much. Who would go to a social gathering and approach it like a to-do list? Okay, I showed up, I look good, I got my thing, got this, make some conversation. Okay, I've done the conversation, I can go home now. Like sort of like we can live in this like, what's next? What's next? Do the thing. And the opposite of this would be to be present for these things and enjoy these things. How can you reclaim passion and joy? How did you learn to want things and figure out what brings you joy? I realize now that I live my entire life in either a reactive state, taking care of the dysfunctional people and situations I often find myself stuck in with being attempting to prove my worth. And frankly, anyone who will tell me I have any, I truly don't understand how people enjoy things and form meaningful ambitions. And that makes perfect sense to me because I live that way as well. How I was able to reclaim joy was I did a 3-year childhood trauma group about processing how joy got wrecked. And in my case, there was death in the family, there was alcoholism. My daily experience as a kid is what I call kind of dull thud depression. Like, things weren't in color in my family system, you know what I mean? Like, there was Christmas. We lived for Christmas, Christmas was colorful, but the day-to-day life was pretty wrought with, like, miserable parents, drinking, dysfunction, the pets weren't fed, the kids weren't fed, chaos, you know? So there was just this gradually that wears on a kid. I'm not saying you have to have that childhood to live this. You could even live in a very well put together household, but no one knows how to connect. And or you could have lived with alcoholic parents that ran from their feelings and ran from their children. Workaholic parents is what I mean. Um, and they lived in a not present to-do list, you know? Who had a very shame-based parent where they had to show up to the event looking perfect with the perfect thing or at a holiday party or whatever, but they were so shame-based if their hair looked wrong, they would freak out, you know, like, they were just so rigid, they're not present, there's really no how would you know what how would we know as kids what joy is when everything is so difficult and stressful, you know? Joy comes from parents living in joy, families enjoying each other, some spontaneity in the family, being seen as a kid. You know, I often talk about, as a little kid, I think we all from a heart place, we just wanted, like, pizza bowling night with our family. Like, when you're 3 or 4, if you had siblings, like, you just maybe wanted connection, like, for people to play in the like, I'm talking real, like, 2 or 3 years old. Like, that's kind of what they want. They want special time with a parent, and that's where a lot of joy I think joy comes from having a parent who is enjoying you, you know? So, how reclaim passion and joy? We have to deal with the rest of the feelings. I was able to come back to joy by processing death in the family and grief and holding my parents accountable, processing my very narcissistic dad and my alcoholic mom. I had to wake up grief in order to get to the joy because I went to therapy very, very numb. So, a question for anybody who struggles to cry, who lives in a very difficult relationship with allowing yourself to cry, or you might feel like you're a little bit of an odd duck because you don't feel connected to certain feelings. And that's what just simply happens to kids when we because it's sort of like it's a little bit tricky to explain. There was a video that I did, like unknown childhood trauma symptoms, where I really talk about when we're 4 years old and we're not growing up in safety, we can't pick and choose about which feelings to keep because we are leaving our body, we're leaving our emotional body and childhood trauma, and we're going up into our head. And I love that you mentioned the meaningless goals and tasks. Like it's a cerebral way to live in the world. If I accomplish this long to-do list, I'm gonna feel and thank you for that, like for to answering my question about crying. If I fix this to-do list or do it all, I'm gonna feel something, and that something never materializes. That's an example of being disconnected from the emotional body, um, like a workaholism thing or something like that. And I think good trauma work takes the individual back into their body through getting to the feelings that they need to process and go after. So joy and passion, they are in you and they are there. They are just buried underneath everything that happened in the family system. So when I did a lot of processing, gradually I was able to cry more and really feel feelings. Gradually I was able to be more spontaneous and not so be in my head. Um, and I was in rough shape, you know what I mean? Like passion and joy. I remember my first year of therapy, my mentor, my therapist at the time, um, she sent me on a homework task of on my day off from a restaurant job to go to the beach and take the commuter rail around Boston up to the beach. And it was so like, what about Bob? It was so like because my idea of relaxing or rejuvenating was to just sit in a coffee shop and pound coffee and chain smoke cigarettes and read my self-help books. I had no spontaneity at all. I had going on a hike, I would have been baffled, absolutely baffled about that. Going to a park, who does that? You know, because it's like I grew up in bars. So I went to the beach one day. I got a ticket for the train. I got myself a sandwich from a sub shop, and I went to the beach. And I get to this beautiful beach on the North Shore of Massachusetts, and I'm like, "Now what do I do?" Like, that's how I'm so grateful to have done that work because I don't really live like that anymore, like, who has anyone out there approached vacation like a series of things that you gotta do instead of enjoying a vacation? It's that's kind of like what it's like because we don't know how to be present or be joyous or passionate about something. Um, and also one other last suggestion in this. So definitely in our RP group, look into The Artist Way by Julie Cameron. And you don't have to be a creative person, but maybe look into that's a great thing to look at about things like creativity, passion, and joy. So what about Bob? You really have to be great-haired to understand that movie, or get that movie. Okay, hard question here, everybody. We're going political question here. In your recent video about the Trump Van Zelensky meeting, you talked about similarities it had with family bullying. In the comments, many folks commented that Trump and Vance's insistence on gratitude, yes, you should be grateful to the US, was similar to what they experience in their own homes. Can you talk more about this dynamic? Um, what is it about parents, caregivers, and constantly accusing their children of being ungrateful? Yes, that last part I really want to focus on. An analogy that is like with living with toxic parents about being ungrateful is they decided to have children, and we can liken that to philosophically or metaphorically, inviting someone to dinner. So we invite someone to dinner, and they show up, and then they sit down in a chair, and they're like, "Don't fucking sit in that chair. That's my chair. You come into my house, and what's wrong with you?" They start to eat, and they're like, "What do you have to say for yourself?" And that I'm feeding you. How do you feel about that? You could probably get where I'm going with it. It's odd. It's very shaming. It's very antagonistic. But, like parents who are sort of like, I brought you into the world, there wasn't any kind of conversation about that beforehand. So I've never understood as an adult or even as a boy why children need to feel um intense gratitude for just being welcomed into the family, because it's just an odd position to put somebody in. So there's that. So the Trump and Vance thing with the gratitude was about any way we think about this stuff when we're dealing with a confusing toxic person or toxic family situation is think about what were Trump and Vance getting out of shaming Zelensky for prior assistance that actually didn't even involve them. Um, what did Trump and Vance get out of that? That might be the simplest way to kind of break that down. And what they got out of it, in my mind, is they got to look like heroes. But there's something very specific that why I likened in that video Zelensky to a teenager being chastised, or that they were bullied and everything got turned around or something like that, is they get to seem a certain way, and it's very theatrical. It's very dramatic. So here's a hypothetical. A 12-year-old is physically abused by a step parent, and they go to their biological parent to try to get some help around it. And the biological parent sides with the abusive step parent, and there's a flipping a normative exchange as leverage to shame, like aid for Zelensky or help for the kid who was abused by the step parent. Now becomes like manipulating someone's vulnerability. Hopefully, I'm making sense here. Then there's some smoke and mirrors around a valid concern. You know, um, Zelensky's valid concern is something like, well, okay, if I acquiesce and we do this deal, there's no guarantee that Russia won't continuously, not mess with my country. And they're told, don't worry about it. That's the same kind of a thing. Like, well, wait a minute, I have to live with this evil stepdad who's already abused me, and now you're saying it's all in my head and don't worry about it. So, but the leverage thing, the shaming them, and the use, coming back to your question, the use of the gratitude thing was really putting somebody on the spot and punching below the belt about their vulnerability to make themselves look a certain way. then the best advice anytime you're in this situation with somebody, whether someone's being difficult or turning things around on you or whatever, is this question, well, how did we all get here? Because with the Zelensky thing, now they're in this conversation about Zelensky is ungrateful and he's dictating how people should feel. There was something really misinterpreted. I just want like Zelensky at once sort of said, "Oh, you'll feel the influence." And people like moronically, very low intelligence people were like, "He's threatening the US." Like how do you get that from that? What Zelensky was meaning, the US will gradually feel the influence of Russia, if not that you're feeling it now. But they took it as like something's going to happen between the pond. It was just dumb. So there's that. And I'm sorry if you weren't expecting a political conversation, but I think it's goofy if we actually don't talk about these things sometimes. How did we all get here? If it's like in the Oval Office, hang on a second, guys. How did we all get here? In 2014, Russia attacked Crimea, and then they were pulled out from the G7, and they had a heavy sanctions. And then he did the same thing in 2022, and Russia is the aggressor. But in that conversation with Trump and Vance, that is now not talk. We're not talking about that anymore. Now we're talking about you need to just let it go and sign enough with the thing. It's literally like saying to that abused 12-year-old by the evil step parent, "Oh, enough with fighting with the step parent. You just gotta get with the program here." How did we get here? So anytime that you're faced with someone that is really turning things around or Darvo or gaslighting or whatever, you can cut through all of it by sort of saying, "How did we get here?" Like if a 12-year-old had the power, the 12-year-old would be like, "Hold the fucking phone, everybody. How did we get here? We got here because this new person in my life was physically abusing me, and I only know them for 3 months, and now I have to live with them after this horrific divorce. And how did we all get here is that my own biological parent is drinking the Kool-Aid and siding with the abusive MF because he's just that manipulative, and actually my biological parent isn't really that safe. How did we get here?" It's my favorite question. It's my absolute favorite question. My own mom, for years, in and out of contact with my mom, like, "Well, you really broke my heart when you cut me out for those years." How did we get there, mom? Oh, and how did we get there? Have them answer that. How did we get here? Many conversations about your drinking, many ruined social events, many a whole childhood of like inappropriate experiences. Like how did we get here? But the abusive, toxic person usually wants to make it about the issue du jour in the present, you know? So, in other words, when you go to that family event and someone was saying somewhere today, like maybe in a comment, that they went to a family event, a family member was released from prison and was very touchy feely with this person's teenage daughter, and then when this person brought it up with the family or had a reaction to protect the daughter, everyone was just like, "Hold the phone. That's a big accusation to make. How did we get here, everybody? The sexual predator just got released from jail. We invited him into the house." You know? So anyway, how did we get here is my favorite thing. Anyway, let's see. Got a couple questions left. Can you explain a little bit about what we tend to see in the early stages of developing a sense of self once our inner parent starts to take some corrective action? If there's enough time, perhaps you can touch on some common pitfalls that can come up there as well, or at least how it can strengthen the foundation of safety and security we have with ourselves. Thank you. As we're growing, it's a beautiful thing to reclaim a sense of self, but there is a process to it. When I, started to develop a sense of self, it was kind of shaky, where I kind of went from being very people pleasy to kind of being aggressive. And we kind of have to have this opposite reaction, I think, where, it's sort of like someone we might if you were in your trauma stuff and you were never opinionated about anything because you never wanted to rock the boat, you might go to the opposite side of I have this analogy where We're driving on the left side of a highway, grinding into the guardrails in our I can't speak up, I have to people please, it's the only way. We start to do some work and we start to heal a little bit, get a little bit of sense of self going. Then we go to the opposite side of the highway and now we're like, I'm gonna say my opinion. I'm gonna, I'm never gonna people please again. So it's kind of a normal thing, but it's a little bit like a pitfall just because it can kind of feel like you're a little bit gone in the total opposite direction. But then the next stage is kind of becoming more balanced and coming sort of centered. We can go from being a people pleaser to someone who's like, not today, Satan. I'm not bringing those donuts. In fact, I'm going to send an angry email about why my office asked me to bring in donuts when I always bring in the donuts. And then we can kind of come to center and not be so reactive to it. So that's a little bit like the process. Um, and that's really kind of like what it's like. And just know that early recovery with this stuff is a lot of waxing and waning. So it's okay that if you're really boundaried one day and then maybe you're a mess the other day, or if you're really like being direct in conversation and then on the bad day you lose that and you're like, oh, I lost that skill, like you're just, you're going up against a lifetime of conditioning and learning a lot of new skills. So there's that. Quick question here. What are some TV shows or films that recommend that illustrate? I would love, maybe you guys can answer this, that illustrate childhood trauma and amazing recovery, like with your own life. I love the movie Matilda. That's the only thing I could really, I'm sure there's others, but what would you guys answer this? What are some TV shows or films you would recommend that illustrate trauma in an amazing recovery, like with your own life? It would be good for inspiration and motivation. So, yeah, would love to hear that. Where'd you guys go? I lost you. Okay. Next question. Many people can't identify with the inner child, inner adult therapy model. I know what you mean, but what other models? Oh, why my nose is so itchy. What other models can they look into for therapy and self help that might be a better fit for them? It's a great question. EMDR. IFS is a little bit closer. That's more parts work, but it's not so specifically inner adult, inner child. So, somatic work, like body work, where there's not a conversation about that. EMDR, I think I already said that. But there's one thought that I'm curious about why is many people, I mean, check out the therapy. It really doesn't work for you. It really doesn't work for you. Another analogy that you can have for the inner child, inner adult stuff is simply inner adult is like our prefrontal cortex. Inner child is our amygdala within the trauma brain, the limbic system. And we're trying to have a conversation between those parts of our brain to shut off the smoke alarm that is the amygdala. What's one way you could put it? Or you could talk more about it. You could simply see the inner child as our subconscious and our inner adult as our consciousness. And there's a conversation between those two things. But the thing is that many people don't like the inner child, inner adult model. And this is just something, if it doesn't work for you, fine. But just something to consider is that growing up, tenderness got wrecked. So some people get a little bit nauseated when they hear this inner child, inner adult stuff. They think it's too woo woo. They prefer a cerebral therapy. They don't like the idea of connecting with a child. So I would just sort of say, check your reaction to this inner child thing. And if there's, if it's just more just conceptually you don't get it, that's perfectly fine. But in other words, inner child language can be triggering to a family system that's really kind of anti-love, or a part of you that you would prefer to keep repressed because you have some disgust around having an inner child. So it's just something to kind of think about. Okay, we made it to the last question. How can you cope with your parents' contradiction? This is a really powerful question. On one side, you know that they love you and they would give your life for you. On the other side, they don't show up when necessary and are not willing to take any necessary steps to work on topics that have affected you or still affect you as an adult. The desire to understand this contradiction creates inner tension and conflict that dysregulates. Feels like freeze and often ends the discussion. It's like a dance of rage, love, and resignation. I know what you mean. My own mom was like, I would do anything for my kids, and I really had to spend a lot of time in therapy to really unpack what that means. And it's easy, it's an easy dramatic thing to say that they would do anything for you, but their behavior doesn't back that up. So love is behavioral. It's not what people sort of say. And that's a very confusing thing for the inner child. Like when you get dysregulated there, it's like, yes, we love you, but we only want to exist with you in this very regimented way where you don't bring anything up. We don't show up for you and you don't bring that up. We don't really feel connected. We only feel connected in the superficial way. And that's how it's going to go. Anything else we don't want anything to do with is usually kind of a message from a family system like that. Does anyone have parents like that? They're not very emotional. They're kind of shut down. Nothing was ever wrong. There's never really a problem. I don't even know what you're kind of talking about. I love my children. I would do anything for them. But when my first grandchild is born, I'm not going to get on a plane and go see them. They can come see me because I got shit to do. Do you guys see the logic there? You know, like I love this question so much because I relate to it, but also trauma aside, despite what happened and who they were, who out there feels greatly dissatisfied and lonely when they're with or in their family system? We got to really look at that. You're lonely probably for good reasons because they're not present. They haven't done any work on themselves. They just, they can even be really like it can be really sad. I've had many clients like, "Yep, I gotta go visit my mom. We gotta go to tchotchkes and open up gifts," and it's this whole tradition thing, but no one talks about, you know, mom's rage or my brother who's an addict, or it's a very lonely thing to do, to be not to do, but to be in. And this is often there's really a paradox with the family estrangement stuff and no contact stuff. Because I've had clients that they weren't physically abused. They just have these family systems that are kind of like passive aggressive. No one's really happy, but there's an expectation to be part of that no matter what. Um, and sometimes it's easier to go no contact when the behavior is so off and egregious. It's hard to when it's more like confusing. Like raise your hand out there if you came from a family that is like a tricky family, not a blatantly abusive family, but raise your hand out there if you feel like you are not known. They don't know what you do for work. They don't know who you're dating. They don't know what books you read. They don't really know you. That's just effing weird. And I know I'm kind of waxing poetic here, but the desire to understand this contradiction creates an inner tension and like the inner conflict is, and I totally get this. You want simply a family. You want your mom and dad to kind of come clean on things or to be more connected with you or even to be a little bit honest. It's like, I think I know what you're asking, but I don't know how to do emotions. I just don't like that. Even that would be an honest start. So you have a very tricky family, but they're also kind of aggressive. We don't want to talk about it. That never happened. So it's very lonely when it's like we have families that are like, it's our way or the highway. You know, you show up, you have some eggnog, you don't talk about anything, you appreciate, we talk about the neighbors or whatever. Even, and I know that this sounds like I'm being mean, but families can even have like goofy traditions as if the tradition is evidence that they're a family. Like sort of like, well, every year we have a Yule log. Get the best Yule log yet. You know what I mean? Like dad doesn't know who you are as a person and avoids you, but you got the Yule log. Um, so there's that. And I'm all out of questions. And oh yeah, right around the kind of like time. Um, how was that? What was I gonna say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I really appreciate everyone who submitted questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them. Again, this is the lecture coming up this Saturday, more about emotional security, working with the inner child. There are still seats left. I would even consider joining the membership because you get a discount where you get the membership and the whole lecture. And again, if you are seeking a group therapy or some childhood trauma work, here's the RRP therapist. I hope I can save the chat because it's like I kind of feel like I was when I'm reading the questions, I don't really feel connected with the chat. But did anyone have any last like logistical questions about like any videos that are coming up or What will I be doing during the apocalypse? What will you be doing during the apocalypse? Have you planned the apocalypse yet? Who's stocking up on propane? I don't know. It's got real dark. Sorry. Yes, it is nice to not be alone in this. I love that you all joined. How many of you are all here? 600 of you? I am touched, you know. Whatever you decide to do, keep going, keep working with this inner child stuff. I don't mean to spam you with the lecture. It is a really good resource, but I totally get it. If you cannot attend, yes, this is Saturday at 1. It's a webinar format. There is a Q&A with it. You'll be canning. Watermelon warrior, what are you going to be canning? How do you can? That's a skill. Anyone growing anything? Any planting a garden? We have a cyclone on the way in Australia. Be safe. Is it like cyclone season? Thank you, KT. Hit like. Oh, if you could leave a comment. Can you comment on the live instead of the chat? Is that possible? I think it goes to video. Oh, yeah. I have a favor. I have a hard ask. Once I get off this thing, I think it is released as a video. And if you could make comments on it, like great session or something like that, it really supports the video. So the live becomes a video that you can watch at any time. I have loofah seeds. What's a loofah seed? Growing cotton. Damn, you're prepared. Gonna make a poncho. Poppy, zinnias, love that. Can you make a 90s poncho? I'm not making fun of you, but it's like the first thing I thought about making cotton. What was I saying? Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for the contribution to the channel. What else? Yeah, so if you can make a comment on the video itself when I log off. I'm having fun here. Okay, before I go, I want to hear some topics. What video topics do you want to hear? Further questions that we can do. And I do plan on going live more because I always have a blast with this. I love connecting with you guys. We might just do one where we just kind of shoot the poop. We're just kind of hanging out, talking about music. But seriously, what video ideas might you have? I'm glad the videos are helpful. It's a good. Raising chickens, like as a video topic? We have a neighbor that raises chickens, and we actually grow vegetables, and we have this bartering system, so I feel pretty set up for the impending apocalypse. We're all childhood trauma survivors laughing about the impending end of the world. Ha ha. Oh my gourd. Okay, how to connect with people. Account online. Tell me something more specifically, like romantically or just people in general. I learned how to connect with people in a real way. Can you teach us drums? Yes, I can. That would be a fun video. Playing drums is a lot like EMDR because you're using both hemispheres of your brain, which is like bilateral stimulation. Anytime, I've never walked away from playing the drums in a bad mood. I always feel good. All right. Connect with making friends. Friends, yeah, that's a hard one. Someone asked recently, where was it? I said somewhere in a video, I've always had older friends throughout my life. Anyone relate to that? Come to Puerto Rico? I'm on it. I proposed to my wife in Puerto Rico, thank you very much, and I loved it there, which is a very cute story. I dissociated on my way down from the resort to the beach because I was like, "Do I have to ring? What am I doing?" Drum lessons, yeah. When I was teaching drums, I used to teach Weezer's Blue Album because the drumming is really good and specific. Shoot the poop. Thank you so much for the the chat went away. Who was that? Thank you so much. That was very generous, Sarita. Thank you. Shooting the poop. Here's my question. I feel weird being around. Oh, it's gone too fast. Oh, that's how to balance personal mental health and fighting for others' social causes. I'm going to answer that one right now because it's something that always comes up for me and it's always on my mind. It is good to fight for causes. But I think it's a little bit like helping ourselves first and really making our inner child a priority for a little while. The causes will always be there, and, you can still contribute to all of them, but the causes can really trigger our childhood trauma, like with the Zelensky thing. So I really love that question, Jay. So in other words, we might be like the causes or the need for the causes is like re-traumatizing ourselves. So I'm just saying it would be good enough to take 6 months, a year, some time off from those causes, but you make the best decision for yourself because doing activism is extremely hard work that is triggering by nature. And it's a lot like being in our family. It's a lot like fighting against something that feels impossible. And it might be hard to have the bandwidth to reparent your inner child or work on your childhood trauma when it's so triggering in that way. So, all right, gang. Thanks for shooting the poop with me. Love to you all. Have a great night. I want to do this again. Thank you so much for your questions. Consider joining the membership on Saturday. You just go to my website. I'm not going to spam you with the link again. And much love to you all. Bye, everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for hanging out with me. Take care.